Iran just lost the only ally that mattered after China chose Trump over Tehran. Today is May 16th, 2025, and in the last 72 hours, something happened inside the diplomatic architecture of the Middle East that the mainstream coverage is burying under trade deal headlines and photo opportunities. What you are watching play out right now is not a diplomatic realignment. It is the structural collapse of the one assumption that has kept Iran's entire deterrence posture alive for the last decade. China did not just shake Donald Trump's hand in Riyadh. China made a decision about who it is willing to risk economic pain for and who it is not. And Iran was not even in the room when that answer was given. This is not about optics. This is not about Xi Jinping wanting a photo with the American president. Pull the lens back, and what you are actually looking at is the moment Iran's strategic depth evaporated. Every missile system Iran has been building, every proxy corridor from Baghdad to Beirut, every IRGC commander who spent the last 5 years telling Tehran that Beijing would never let Washington go all the way, they were wrong. And now the math has changed completely. Stay with me, because the real story here is not the summit. It is what Iran believed the summit could never produce, and why that belief was always going to fail. For nearly a decade, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has operated on one foundational assumption. Beijing needs Iranian oil more than Beijing needs American goodwill. That assumption drove every calculated risk Tehran has taken inside the Strait of Hormuz. It drove the harassment of U.S. naval vessels in the Persian Gulf. It drove the Houthi missile campaigns that put commercial shipping on its knees in the Red Sea. It drove the quiet confidence inside Veliati's foreign ministry that no matter how tight Washington squeezed, China would absorb the pressure and keep Iranian crude moving. That assumption was always fragile, and the evidence was hiding in the numbers the entire time. Here is what the IRGC's strategic planners apparently chose to ignore. China's total trade volume with the United States ran at approximately $640 billion annually before Trump's second-term tariff architecture started reshaping the ledger. China's trade with Iran, even at peak discounted oil purchase volumes under full sanctions evasion protocols, was valued at somewhere between $15 and $20 billion per year. The ratio is not close. It has never been close. For every dollar of Iranian crude China was absorbing through shell intermediaries in Fujairah and Oman, Beijing was running $30 of economic exposure to American market access, American semiconductor restrictions, and American financial system leverage. Iran was not China's strategic partner. Iran was China's discount fuel supplier. And discount fuel suppliers do not get protected when the cost of that protection starts showing up on Beijing's balance sheet. The real question was never whether China would choose Washington over Tehran if forced to choose. The real question was when the forcing function would become visible enough that Beijing could no longer pretend the choice was not being made. Riyadh just answered that question. And let me show you what this actually means for every Iranian commander who built a career on the assumption that Chinese cover was permanent. Let's walk the chronology precisely, because the sequence here is not coincidental. It is operational. On May 13th, Donald Trump landed in Riyadh for the first leg of a Gulf tour that his foreign policy architects had been scaffolding for weeks. The public framing was investment deals, normalization optics, and Saudi arms packages. That framing is accurate, but insufficient. What the summit was actually designed to do, at the strategic layer below the press releases, was force a clarity moment in every capital that had been betting on American diplomatic exhaustion. Beijing understood the signal immediately. 2 days before Trump touched down in Riyadh, Chinese state media ran a notably restrained set of pieces on Iran. No solidarity language, no condemnation of American military posturing in the Gulf. The editorial temperature inside People's Daily and Global Times, which are not newspapers, they are instruments of Chinese foreign policy communication, dropped to near zero on Iran. That is not an accident. That is Beijing managing the expectation space ahead of a decision it had already made. The decision? China would not publicly antagonize Trump's Gulf initiative. China would not extend new credit lines to Tehran. China would not accelerate weapons technology transfers that were already moving through the pipeline at a pace slow enough to be plausibly deniable. And most critically, China would continue purchasing Iranian crude through intermediaries, but would not expand that purchase volume or provide diplomatic cover if Washington moved to close the remaining sanctions enforcement gaps. Pull the lens back. What Beijing just did is the diplomatic equivalent of quietly removing the forward air defense layer from Iran's deterrence architecture. Iran could threaten the Strait of Hormuz because Tehran believed that any American escalatory response would carry a Chinese cost. If Washington moved against Iranian naval assets or IRGC infrastructure, Beijing would respond economically, diplomatically, and through arms channel pressure. That calculus is now broken. And it gets more serious from here, because the operational implications run directly into what the U.S. military has been positioning in the region for the last 90 days. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group has been operating inside the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden theater since January. The Truman's air wing includes FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornets with a combat radius of approximately 720 nautical miles unrefueled. That radius, paired with aerial refueling assets, specifically the Boeing KC-46A Pegasus tankers operating out of Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, extends effective strike reach across every major IRGC naval facility along Iran's southern coast. Bandar Abbas, Jask, Chabahar. All of it is inside the kill chain. But the Truman is not the most important asset in the current force posture. The most important asset is what is operating above it. The E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, the Truman's airborne early warning platform, provides battle space management across a 600-kilometer radar footprint. Every IRGC fast boat that departs from Bandar Abbas, every Shahab-3 transporter erector launcher that moves out of hardened storage near Khurramabad, every Islamic Republic of Iran Navy frigate that alters course in the Persian Gulf, the E-2D sees it. The data is passed in real time to the strike package. Iran knows this. The IRGC has known this for years. And the same assumption about Chinese cover, was that the political cost of acting on that surveillance picture would remain prohibitively high. Because Beijing was watching. Because Beijing would react. Beijing just demonstrated that it will not react. The real question is, what does the IRGC do now, with a surveillance architecture that has always been able to see everything, and a political environment that just removed the one constraint on acting on what it sees? Let me show you the weapons dimension, because this is where the operational shift becomes impossible to dismiss. The United States Air Force has been quietly rotating B-1B Lancer bombers through Diego Garcia, the joint US-UK base in the Indian Ocean, at a tempo that has not received adequate coverage. The B-1B, in its current Block DT upgrade configuration, carries up to 24 AGM-158 JASSM-ER cruise missiles per aircraft. The JASSM-ER, Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile Extended Range, carries a 900-kilogram penetrating warhead and has a published range exceeding 920 kilometers. Classified estimates run the actual range considerably higher. What that means operationally? A B-1B launching from outside Iranian territorial airspace, flying a standard egress profile toward the Gulf of Oman, can reach hardened IRGC infrastructure inside Iran's mountain interior without ever entering the contested air defense envelope. Fordo, Isfahan, the Parchin military complex. None of those targets require overflight of Iranian territory. The JASSM-ER solves that problem before Iranian air defense radar has a firing solution. Iran's air defense architecture is structured around Russian-supplied S-300 PMU-2 batteries. The Bavar 373 is Tehran's domestic counterpart, though its actual intercept performance remains operationally unproven against modern, low-observable cruise missiles. The S-300 PMU-2 can theoretically engage targets at altitudes between 25 meters and 27 kilometers, and it ranges out to approximately 200 kilometers. Against a subsonic cruise missile flying a terrain-hugging profile with a radar cross-section under 1 square meter, the real-world intercept probability degrades sharply. Iran has no tested answer to a saturation JASSM-ER strike. They have never faced one in live conditions. Their air defense commanders know the gap exists, and they have been banking on political constraints, specifically the perceived Chinese deterrent, to keep that gap theoretical rather than operational. That deterrent just evaporated. Let's talk about the naval choke point, because the Strait of Hormuz is the one place the IRGC has always believed it could impose costs that would make any American military calculus too expensive to execute. The strait at its narrowest point, the shipping lane transit corridor between Larak Island and the Omani coast, is approximately 34 kilometers wide. The IRGC Navy has positioned multiple layers of anti-access systems along Iran's northern coast. Nor anti-ship missiles, which are Iranian reverse-engineered derivatives of the Chinese C-802, with a range of approximately 120 kilometers and an active radar seeker in the terminal phase. Qatar missiles, with a range up to 200 kilometers. Fast inshore attack craft, the Ghadir-class and Zulfikar-class vessels, capable of swarm operations using hit-and-run tactics in the shallow littoral water where U.S. destroyer drafts create operating constraints. The IRGC's Hormuz denial theory has always depended on two conditions. First, that the cost of breaking through would be high enough to deter the attempt. Second, that China's presence in global oil markets would ensure that any sustained Hormuz disruption hurt Washington's allies as much as it hurt Iran. Condition 2 just collapsed. If China is no longer providing diplomatic cover for Tehran, the threat of a Hormuz disruption that damages global supply chains and irritates Beijing no longer creates the deterrence leverage Iran assumed it had. In fact, a Hormuz closure now threatens Chinese oil imports from Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Oil China needs far more than it needs Iranian crude. Tehran using Hormuz as a weapon against American pressure is now also a weapon pointed directly at Chinese supply lines. The IRGC has built its entire Hormuz strategy on a diplomatic assumption that Beijing just invalidated. And it gets more serious from here. Because the hidden operational turn in this story is not about what the United States can now do. It is about what Iran can no longer threaten credibly. The IRGC's deterrence model has three legs. The Hormuz denial leg, now compromised. The proxy network leg, which runs through Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian-aligned militia in Iraq, and the Houthi movement in Yemen. And the nuclear ambiguity leg, the implied threat that if Iran is pushed far enough, enrichment timelines compress toward weaponization. The proxy network leg has been under simultaneous pressure from three directions since January. Israeli precision strikes against Hezbollah command infrastructure in southern Lebanon have degraded that organization's senior military leadership at a pace that IRGC Quds Force advisors have been unable to offset. In Iraq, Prime Minister al-Sudani has been navigating increasing pressure from Washington to constrain Popular Mobilization Force's militia activity, with American secondary sanctions threats targeting Iranian-linked financial networks inside Iraqi banking. And in Yemen, U.S. strikes against Houthi radar installations, command nodes, and coastal missile sites have continued at a tempo that has systematically reduced Houthi targeting accuracy against Red Sea commercial traffic. All three proxy legs are under compression simultaneously, and the Chinese diplomatic cover that was supposed to create political costs for applying that pressure is gone. The nuclear ambiguity leg is the one that requires the most careful analysis, because this is where the strategic picture becomes the most consequential and the most deliberately obscured by mainstream framing. Iran's enrichment program at Fordo and Natanz is currently operating at a level that IAEA inspectors have documented. Enriched uranium stockpiles at 60% purity, with breakout timeline estimates from senior U.S. officials ranging between 1 and 2 weeks if Iran made the political decision to sprint to weapons grade. That is not a new number. It has been climbing for 18 months. But the conventional analysis treats that number as a static deterrent. Iran holds the nuclear card and no one wants to call the hand. What changes when China removes its diplomatic cover is the political cost calculation for an Israeli or American preemptive strike against Iranian enrichment infrastructure. Beijing's presence in the equation was the argument that any military action against Iran would trigger a Chinese diplomatic and economic response that Washington was not prepared to absorb. Remove China from the deterrence architecture, and the preemptive strike calculation changes fundamentally. This is what the mainstream coverage is missing entirely. The Riyadh summit is not a trade story, it is a deterrence story, and Iran just lost the one variable that was keeping the deterrence math in their favor. Pull the lens all the way back now, because what you are looking at, when you assemble every piece of this picture, is an Iran that is more isolated right now than at any point since the 2012 oil embargo. And 2012 Iran did not have the current proxy network degradation. 2012 Iran did not have a Houthi campaign that failed to close the Red Sea. 2012 Iran did not have a Lebanese proxy that has lost 2 secretary generals in 14 months. 2012 Iran had a Chinese relationship that was still transactional enough to provide real diplomatic friction against Western pressure. The geometry of Iranian power has been contracting. The Riyadh summit did not start that contraction. It accelerated it by removing the one external variable that Tehran's strategic planners could point to as a ceiling on American escalatory options. The IRGC commanders understand this. The statements coming out of Khamenei's office over the last 48 hours, the language about American failure, about the irrelevance of regional normalization, about the strength of the resistance axis, that language is not confidence. It is the rhetorical architecture of an institution that is recalculating its position and choosing defiance as the face it shows while the recalculation happens. Defiance is not deterrence. And the United States military, which has 3 carrier strike groups within rapid repositioning range of the Gulf, a persistent drone and signals intelligence architecture over the Strait, B-1B rotations out of Diego Garcia, and JASM-ER inventories that can reach every node in Iran's strategic infrastructure, that military is not deterred by rhetoric. The real question now is what Tehran does in the next 72 to 96 hours to try to reconstruct some version of the leverage it just lost. And there are only 2 plausible moves. The first move is an acceleration of enrichment activities designed to force the nuclear ambiguity question back to the center of global attention. If Iran can reinsert itself into the conversation as the party that might sprint to a weapon, it forces Beijing back into the equation as a party that needs to manage Iranian behavior, which gives Tehran a form of leverage even in the absence of Chinese cover. This is a dangerous move because it invites exactly the preemptive strike logic I just described, but cornered strategic actors do not always choose the optimal option. The second move is an IRGC naval provocation inside the strait, designed to demonstrate that Hormuz denial remains a credible threat regardless of the diplomatic shifts above the surface. Harassing a U.S. Navy vessel, detaining commercial shipping with a provocation-level rationale, deploying fast boat swarms in a way that forces the Truman's carrier air wing to generate a visible response. The purpose is not to win a tactical exchange. The purpose is to demonstrate to Beijing that the cost of not being invested in Tehran's survival is a volatile Hormuz that damages Chinese supply chain security. Both moves carry serious risk of triggering the response Iran has spent a decade trying to make too expensive to execute. And here is the one operational fact that dismantles any remaining Iranian confidence. The USS Truman Strike Group currently holds an air wing with a daily sortie capacity of over 150 combat sorties. Every significant IRGC naval asset in the Persian Gulf is within that strike radius. Every Noor and Qadr missile battery along the Iranian coast has a known emplacement documented by persistent ISR coverage. Every fast boat pen from Bandar Abbas to Jask is a cataloged target in the Fifth Fleet's strike planning architecture. Iran is not operating in the dark against an adversary that cannot see it. It is operating in full light against an adversary that has been waiting for the political ceiling to lift. The political ceiling just lifted. Here is the honest assessment of where this situation stands right now. Iran has lost its primary diplomatic insulator. The Chinese cover that was supposed to make American escalation politically costly is no longer operating. The three legs of Iranian deterrence, Hormuz denial, proxy network, and nuclear ambiguity, are all simultaneously under pressure in ways they have not been before. The United States military is postured in the region with a strike architecture that can reach every node of Iranian strategic infrastructure, is doing so with full ISR coverage and weapons packages the Iranian air defense system cannot reliably intercept, and is now operating without the political friction that Beijing's implicit partnership with Tehran had previously created. This is not the surface event. The Riyadh summit headline is not about trade deals and photo opportunities. It is the moment the last structural assumption of Iranian deterrence strategy failed. And the commanders in Tehran, the ones reading the same satellite imagery and the same diplomatic readouts and the same Chinese state media temperature that everyone else is reading, they know what it means. The next 72 hours inside Iranian decision-making will determine whether Tehran chooses calculated restraint or dangerous provocation as its response to a strategic isolation it did not see coming with this speed or this completeness. Watch the IRGC naval movements in the Strait. Watch the enrichment declarations from the AEOI. Watch the Houthi operational tempo in the Red Sea. Those are the three signals that will tell you which way Tehran has decided to go. Subscribe and turn on notifications because the next 48 hours may matter more than the last 2 weeks. Drop your prediction in the comments. Stay informed, stay ahead.